Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm going to be doing my spiritual tag video today, the tag video that people voted in the post section / community tab that they wanted to see next. And it took me a long time to find exactly the right kind of idea that I wanted to go with for this. A lot longer. It took a lot longer than I thought it was going to take. I was able to find quite a few witchy, new agey, spiritual tag videos and a lot of other more traditional Christian / religious tag video ideas on YouTube, but I couldn't find anything that I really felt I wanted to do first, and many of the questions didn't really seem to suit me. So I scoured the internet and I came across a lady by the name of Chelsea who has a blog called holytension.com, and she did a post of spiritual discussion questions, and I decided to use that as the subject for the tag video that I'm going to do. So it's not, they're actual discussion questions to help if you had a discussion group, a talk group that was meeting with people from different backgrounds. She compiled these questions as a way to help promote conversation without argument. So I felt that these questions were very thought-provoking and that they really suited me better instead of just the stereotypical stuff that you already see on YouTube. So if anybody does want to do this tag on their own channel, I will link the blog with the questions, the original blog post with the questions, in the comment box down below or in the description box down below. Make sure that you give full credit to the blog, though, because I want to make sure that all of the credit goes back to the lady who did the post, the original post. So this has 11 questions that I've written down on a slightly torn piece of paper, but I'm going to see if I can do them all at one time. I was originally going to split this up into a two-part video, but I don't really feel like doing that. I would prefer to just do them all in one take. And I have taken a few notes to make sure that I stay on point. So, because I could go off on a tangent with some of this stuff. So let's see how this goes. I also want to say, just before I get started, that some of these questions I could actually do an entirely separate video on because my answers to be completely what's the word, concise, completely accurate, I would probably spend a lot more time on just one question. But that was also one of the reasons I decided to take notes. So this is a very abbreviated version of what you would hear if you sat down and got to know me for an extended period of time. This is an abbreviated version of some of the stuff that you would hear. So question 1, what is your spiritual background? That alone would take up an entire video. So I was brought up, apparently it's called non-denominational Christian. I was so non-denominational I didn't know what the term meant outside of math. And when I did find out what it meant, I was in my 20s and it still didn't make any sense. But I understand the concept of a tradition, so I see it in terms of a tradition. As far as if anybody for some reason doesn't know what being brought up non-denominational Christian means, it can mean almost practically anything, but the boiled down version is that you're not loyal to a particular church or not loyal to a particular denomination, hence the term non-denominational. You don't practice a particular tradition. you don't follow an official church doctrine, you're free to pretty much learn whatever you want and personalize your connection the way that you want. So that's a short answer. Question 2. What are hinge moments in your life that led you away from your past beliefs or towards current beliefs? I'm not sure that I can really say that. Well, let me back up. I don't feel that I was, quote, led away from a belief. I didn't think I had a belief that required me to be led away from in order to get where I am. Just the opposite, as a matter of fact. I would say that my beliefs have expanded in a way that probably wouldn't have happened otherwise, at least not to the extent that it has. But my own spirituality was, or spiritual seeking, I suppose I should say, was really galvanized by my mother. It was my mother who was a spiritual seeker in the family. She was the driving force in practically everything. She was the one who wanted to go to church. She was the one who wanted to go from place to place, finding what she felt was the connection that she was looking for, and I got that from her. So we went to all different churches. I couldn't tell you what any of them were now by name, because the names didn't really mean anything to me. It was the experience. It was the teachings, the atmosphere. That was what we were interested in. We didn't care what the name over the door was. We cared about what was inside. So she was the one who was responsible for us going anywhere on Sunday in the first place. And we went through a very long process, and I say we, meaning both her and I, because my mother practices basically the same type of spirituality that I do, which I'll get into later. We went through a very long process, very long, of understanding that there was an awful lot that was left out from what we were being taught, things that we were not getting from any of the churches, and probably we're not going to get from Christianity, period. At least mainstream modern Christianity was not going to give us what we were looking for. Some of it, yes, but the majority of it, no. And we started learning a lot about the abandonment by the, quote, church, unquote, various teachings, traditions, facts, history, an awful lot of history that was left out, a lot of preconceived ideas, and a lot of misinterpretations that then became doctrine. Also, there was I was a little puzzled by what she meant by hinge moments, but I suppose, if I'm understanding what she means correctly, there was, I don't remember how old I was, but we tended to listen to the radio far more than watch television. For the vast majority of my life, we did not have cable, thank goodness. Thank goodness. And on one of the radio shows that we were listening to, I have no idea what it was, there was a mathematician, and he came on, and whatever else he was talking about, it completely left my mind. I am not a math person, so that's one reason. But the other reason is because the one thing that he said that I think we were definitely meant to hear was essentially, and I'm paraphrasing now, the probability of every single sci-fi and horror movie that you've ever seen, and all the ones that you didn't want to see being real, is higher than the probability that it isn't. There is a far greater probability that things such as extraterrestrial life exists than there is that there isn't. The probability is higher that there are versus the probability that there isn't. And then also, when we started taking a really close look at the biblical texts, what are accepted as the canonical biblical texts for mainstream Christianity, we noticed an awful lot of parts that they don't bother preaching on in the church. The one that galvanized everything for us was Genesis 6:6, and then also noticing that there are very similar names on both sides of Adam and Eve's, quote, genealogy, unquote. Apparently having two different references to humans being made on two different days. That was another inconsistency that really stood out to us. So those were some of the things that, just a quick summary of just a few of the things that led us to coming out of mainstream Christianity, if you could ever say that we were really in it. And I think even though we weren't loyal to a particular division of Christianity, I would say that we, for the most part, sort of kind of worked within mainstream Christianity, but we had the freedom that people who are loyal to a particular denomination don't have. And to clarify, by loyalty to a particular denomination, we had the freedom to question pretty much whatever we wanted without having to be reined in by a particular governing body. So I don't want to make it sound like those people who are whatever the denomination is, Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterian, whatever, that we look down our noses at them. We didn't. I'm sure that we went to quite a few of those different churches as well. Again, we didn't pay any attention to the name over the door, so I couldn't tell you whether or not we did or not. But the odds are pretty high that we did, because we went to pretty much any type of church that we could find, as long as we didn't get a bad vibe from the people there. We didn't care what they called themselves. Okay, so not chapter 3. This is my writer's brain coming in. Chapter 3. No. Question 3. In your faith journey, what is one thing that leads you to believe? Only one thing? One thing? Come on, people. Can't pick one thing. Can't pick one thing. But for the sake of time, for the sake of time, nature. This is a prompt. Nature and all that implies. And I'm not talking about stereotypical nature anyway, either. I'm talking about all of it. The whole enchilada, the whole spiel, the whole ball of wax. Use that as a prompt and see how deep you can go with it. Because there is an awful lot in everyday life that I look at and say, yeah, I'm going in the right direction. Yeah. And sometimes I admit it's a little disturbing at times too, but I would rather know than not know. There's an awful lot of reading between the lines that I do, or at least try to do. I'm not sure exactly how successful I am. I could always be more successful at it, but I try. I hope this makes sense. I really do. Question 4. In your faith journey, what is one thing that causes you to doubt? I'm going to have to go back can't really answer this in the present tense, partly because I don't have anywhere close to the amount of doubt that I had before. In fact, I had to ask myself, do I actually have that much doubt? If I do, it's primarily about myself, which I'm working on. But some of the things that concerned me in the past, I'm not going to say that they caused me to doubt, but they concerned me. I think that's a better way of putting it. Was, again, doubting myself, which I don't do nearly as much now as I did in previous years, but it's still there. I'm probably a little bit more than I think. So I would doubt myself, but that didn't mean I doubted God, because I was not brought up with the misconception that God and the church are the same thing, or that God and people are the same thing, or that God and human understanding are the same thing, or that God and the world is the same thing. And even though people say that they understand that, clearly they don't. An awful lot, you look at what they say, you look at what they do, and clearly they don't understand it. Or maybe it's just that they want somebody to blame. Yeah. I've been there, yeah. I empathize. Other things that cause me to doubt. Be concerned. Be concerned, yeah. The biggest concern was getting something wrong, in the sense of believing something that would later turn out to be false, and by the time I found out that it was false, it would have already hindered me in my journey. Wasting time also, because when you have a journey, at least like mine, speaking for myself, because I can only really speak for myself, you become far more aware of the passage of time than I think probably most people are. And you become more aware of where you've gone wrong, and more focused on trying to not make the same mistakes twice. Learning from your old mistakes, applying what you've learned, and not have to fall into the same trap again. So being concerned about being deceived, because it kind of feels, when you come away from what you were brought up knowing, it can feel what I imagine the equivalent would be of floating in the middle of the ocean in a rowboat without oars, and you just have to trust that the current's going to take you somewhere, but you can't really tell whether or not you're moving in some instances. And you don't have, at least you don't appear to have, any help in sight. And you can have a tendency to panic. It can make you feel like you want to panic. In terms of, well, if you're deceived, if you were concerned about being deceived or falling for a trap that, let's say, you end up in a cult or something like that, did you have any concern about going to hell in the Christian sense? No, but that was because of the way that I was brought up in terms of understanding who ends up in hell and who doesn't. I would say that it was definitely different from what some of the people around me seem to understand it to mean. I was raised and accepted, when I got older, the view that, well, since the Bible tells us man looks on the exterior, God looks on the heart. The only person who can truly weigh where somebody should end up in their afterlife, regardless of whether it's for eternity or not. He's not necessarily going to make the same decisions that we would. Probably more often than not, he's not going to make the same decisions that we would. So I didn't believe that if you end up believing something false, that did not automatically mean that, oh, you decided to come away from what you were raised as, not because you hated what you were raised as, because I didn't, but because your goal was to have a much more personal relationship with your Creator, and your love and your focus on the Creator was the be-all, end-all of your journey. But since you ended up falling for a lie because you're human, then you're going to burn in the lake of fire for eternity. I didn't believe that for a second. No. Because the circumstances and where your heart was, what your intentions were, I always believed that that was something that was taken into account. And that's one of the reasons why humans can't really judge where somebody's going to end up. We can speculate. Yes, we can speculate. And I think that that is a natural fear to have when you're talking about wanting to make sure that nothing comes between you and your connection to something higher. That is a natural fear to have, that something's going to come along and sever that. But fear can get in the way too. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be cautious. You should be. But I don't think that the whole burning in the lake of fire for eternity, because he didn't take into account the fact that you just wanted to be closer to him, that's unjust. That's unjust, and God would not be unjust like that. I don't believe. I think that he would take everything into account. Let's see. Question 5. Name a religious teaching that you like but find difficult to follow or live up to, or that you don't like or agree with and is a stumbling block to your faith. I'm not entirely sure that this question is applicable to me. In all fairness, I'm not sure that it's applicable to me. Or questions, I should say, because there's a couple of different questions in one. So to break this down into several parts, I engage in what's commonly known as open spirituality. For anybody who doesn't know what that is, basically you have the freedom to pick and choose from whatever teaching you come across, what you're going to apply, how you're going to apply it, what you're going to believe in, why you believe it. You're not limited to only accepting things that come from a particular tradition or a particular church or a particular teacher. So I'm not sure that naming teaching that I like or dislike or have difficulty following or living up to, that question doesn't really apply to me in the traditional way, but that doesn't necessarily mean that just because I practice open spirituality that it's not difficult at times or that it's less difficult. I would say that you're going to have challenges regardless. The challenges may be different, but you're still going to have challenges. That's part of how you grow. So you can pick and choose different elements, but if you're being led to deeper things like me, there are some truths that can be upsetting. Sorry, my neighbors were making noise. So there are, if you're being led to deeper truths, like me, if you're being led to go a whole lot further down the rabbit hole, as they say, there are some things that you're going to learn that can be upsetting. I mean, even if you don't go that deep, there may still be things that you discover that are upsetting. Things that can temporarily make you question decisions that you've made in the past. And one of the reasons why certain things can be upsetting for me is because I feel how much they ring true. Internally, I don't really have to question it because I can sense and see how true it is. You become a lot more responsible for the role that you play in life. You become more responsible for the impact that you have on others, the impact that you have on the rest of the world, the impact that you have on the environment, the impact that you have on yourself and what goes on in your own head. That doesn't mean that you're bogged down by it. At least I've always made a point of never seeing it as, oh, I'm carrying this terribly heavy burden. My life is even worse now than it was. No, just the opposite. It's just the opposite. It's growing pains. That's really what it is. Spiritual growing pains in, I would say, the fullest sense of the word. Fullest sense of the word, spiritual, because people have a tendency to put spirituality in a box. They don't seem to understand that really everything is spiritual. When you strip away all the superficial worldly stuff, actually everything is spiritual. At least that's my take on it. Also, when she asks anything that's a stumbling block to your faith, I feel that I should point out that faith and belief are two wildly different things. They are not synonyms. One could even make the argument that they're antonyms. But not necessarily. Faith is what you've got when everything else blows up. Faith is what's left. I think I'm also going to link Allura's video on that topic in the description box, because that's a topic that someone who comes across this video may need to hear, and she can explain it a lot better than I can, frankly. So since everything centers on God and heaven to me, and I have a better understanding of what he's like, what God is like, what he likes, what he doesn't like, what he approves of, what he doesn't approve of. I don't have as many issues with being concerned about or being afraid of or worrying about something coming in between me and my devotion for him. Because that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. Now I will say I do incorporate some things that are clearly outside the realm of what I was brought up with. If you've looked at previous book talk videos, you probably get a sense of that. It goes deeper, though I will say it goes a lot deeper than that. I also incorporate other things that I wasn't brought up with, such as Ascended Masters / Saints. I have an interest in certain saints from Catholicism, from Orthodox Christianity. Even though I wasn't brought up with that, I don't follow it. I don't necessarily agree with everything they teach. A lot of things I do agree with. Some things I see as being more symbolic. Some things I don't agree with at all. But that doesn't mean that that doesn't mean I disrespect them or that I don't admire what they do. That doesn't mean I don't admire the saints as examples of people who strove for something that the world would like you to think is unattainable, which are the angelic virtues, which is something else I learned about from Allure. I didn't learn that from the church. One would think that you would, but I didn't. And the little bit that they did say, they just really used the words. They didn't properly define them. They didn't go deep into what the virtues are. So that was something that to this day I feel like I should have gotten a lot sooner, but didn't. So I can still respect saints who came from a tradition other than what I'm doing. And if you can even say that I have a tradition at all. But I can still respect them and not abuse them, because I think there are people who abuse them without necessarily intending to. But I can see them as role models and, look up to them. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. That's like I said, one of the good things about open spirituality is that you're not limited to a particular tradition. You can't say, oh, okay, I have, I believe in these things that are traditionally seen as pagan or neo-pagan, therefore I can't have any of the Christian stuff, or I can't have any of the Jewish stuff, or I can't have any of the Hindu stuff, or I can't have any of the Muslim stuff, or whatever, whatever tradition that you're looking at. No, you can pretty much do whatever you want, because in a lot of instances, some of what you're hearing over here is exactly what you're hearing over here. It's just that it's being described in two different languages, two different terms, by two different groups from two different countries, from two different cultures, with two different histories, with two different perspectives, with two different traditions, two different ways of looking at things. And even in that, you're going to find variety among individuals in those two different groups. So things that might appear to be conflicting at first are not necessarily that conflicting once you go further and try to get past the perceived differences between the terms being used by one group and the terms being used by another. So I don't want to be limited to the traditional, whatever that is, or the non-traditional, whatever that is. Whatever the heck these two things are. I don't want to be limited to either one. I think it would be wrong to shut out a positive example just because going with something, incorporating something that is either traditional or non-traditional is somehow not the done thing in one group or the other. I don't want to limit myself to that. That doesn't necessarily I agree with what the current humans in a particular group are saying or doing or practicing or whatever. And I don't put that on, if using again the saints as an example, I don't put that on them because that's silly. That's silly. They're not the current people doing whatever they're doing. So I would be the one missing out. If I thought that way, I think that I would be the one missing out. So, now that I went through that. Question 6. Do you believe any realms beyond the physical exist? Yeah. If you haven't figured that out yet, yeah. I think that's pretty obvious. And of course, why? Why or why not? How long is this video gonna be? I'm doing this in clips, in part because I'm trying to multitask with other stuff going on in the apartment. This is me. That's life. Okay. Why do I believe any realms other than the physical exist? Well, you got emotions, don't you? You got a mind, don't you? That's the most obvious. Are those physical? No. No. Also, there are too many references. Far too many references all over the world from the might as well say from the beginning of time to now, and probably to the end of time. Yeah, to the end of time. There are still going to be references to other worlds of one type or another. There are way too many references. I personally don't believe our ancestors were stupid. Certain other people in academia may say that. I personally disagree. I respectfully disagree. Because that would imply certain things about us. If they were stupid, what do you call us? Also, if you notice, now science, or what passes for human science, is partially starting to catch up with things like quantum theory, quantum mechanics, the multiverse or the bubbleverse theory. Also, when you think about it, humans are primarily, I would say, probably 90 to 98% non-physical. Because, like I said, you got a mind, you got emotions, you have a spirit, regardless of what you think of that. If you can believe in the fact that you have thoughts are non-physical, your mind is non-physical, your emotions are non-physical, creativity is non-physical, imagination is non-physical. That is the bulk of who you are. Your personality is non-physical. You can express it in physical ways, outwardly, the way you look, the physical things that you do. But it comes from something, it is the direct result of something that is non-physical. Something that nobody's going to be able to see. Nobody who is also physical, at least, is going to be able to see. So that's a good 90 to 98% of who you are. So you are primarily non-physical, regardless of whether you believe in an afterlife or not, regardless of whether you believe in the concept of the soul or not. The vast majority of what makes you you is non-physical. So how big is the leap between that and saying there is a completely other realm that isn't physical to you? Not necessarily to the beings who are living in the realm, but to you. It is non-physical to you. That's not that big a leap. If you as far as I'm concerned, if you can believe in the fact that there are things that are too small that you can't physically see, even in this physical world, you have to use an instrument such as a microscope, sometimes an extremely powerful one, to even know that the thing exists. Why is multiple worlds, multiple universes, etc., etc., that far big a leap? I don't think that it is. At least it's not for me. I think that the example and the examples I've given are just the tip of the iceberg. I think it goes a lot further than that. Question 7. Have you ever had a supernatural / spiritual experience that you feel comfortable sharing? Yeah, that's kind of a little bit of an understatement. Good and bad. I'm not too sure that it's wise to bring details to light here, so I'm not going to. But the short answer is yes, I've had a fair number of experiences, still have a fair number of experiences. Most of them are positive, but I've also had some decidedly negative ones. And yeah, I've had a long-standing interest in Ed Lorraine Warren for multiple reasons. I have a long-standing friendship with Allura for multiple reasons. Just, yeah. There's stuff that happens. There's stuff that happens. Question 8. Why do you believe, or what do you believe happens after you die, and why? This is another one of those long questions with actually multiple questions. And this again, like I said, could be a whole separate video. I could do an entirely separate video just answering this. What do you believe happens after you die, and why? Many religions have a concept of eternity and of heaven/hell or reward/punishment in an afterlife. How do the concepts of good and evil, justice, mercy, and love, and your concept of God interplay in your beliefs about the afterlife? See what I mean? Whole other video. Whole separate video. Okay. So, I gotta look at my notes. How do I boil this down in a way that's not gonna last 2 hours? There's an awful lot I could say, in part because I think it is partly based on the individual in terms of exactly what happens with the afterlife. First of all, yeah, afterlife, that's something that is a part of my practice. It's a belief that is a part of my practice. In terms of things from Christianity, I believe that heaven, hell, God, and the devil exist, though in a far more, how should I say, it's a different way from what I was brought up with. Let me put it like that. My understanding is different from what it was when I was growing up. I did mention in a previous video, I think it was the very last one that I did, with the part 2 of the library hall, with all the different informational books on Wicca, that the Wiccan concept of the Summerlands is something that I believe in. But again, I also believe in heaven, because in my own practice, heaven and the Summerlands are 2 different places. Heaven is actually a lot bigger than what I was taught growing up. And again, I'm speaking of my own personal beliefs now. I believe that heaven is actually a whole lot bigger, whole lot bigger than what I was taught in coming from pieces of mainstream Christianity when I was growing up. But I also believe in the Summerlands. So it's a both and, not either or. Again, my belief in the Summerlands is slightly different from what the average Wiccan believes about the Summerlands. Just for me personally. I personally believe that one of the comments that my mother used to make was that, like I said before, man looks on the external, God looks on the internal. Paraphrasing the Bible verse. And one of the comments that my mother used to say, one of the comments that she used to make, was that people would be mighty surprised, in her opinion, she thought, that people would be mighty surprised at who ends up in heaven. some of the people who ends up in heaven. And they'd also be pretty surprised at some of who end up in hell. Because there's an awful lot about the inner workings of a person, and there's an awful lot that goes on in their private lives. There's an awful lot that goes on up here and in here that nobody knows except that person and their maker. That's strictly between them and their maker. So that is something that actually I ended up adopting, as I got older, and I was able to consciously and responsibly make certain decisions about what I believed myself. That was something that I included because it did make sense with my own personal relationship with God. Even as a child, it was something that made sense. Nobody's going to know you like your maker knows you. You can look for that in somebody else here, but it's not going to happen. It's my personal belief. It's not going to happen. Also, I do believe in the concept of karma. I also believe in the concept of sin, though again, not necessarily exactly the way that Christians define sin, or exactly necessarily even in the way that Hindus define karma. So there are differences there. And I also believe in the concept of an afterlife review, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the person who is judging you is God. I do believe in a final judgment with God, but I think that perhaps how should I put it? I think one of the reasons that I adopted the idea of an afterlife review, and that was something that I believed in even before I started working with Laura, is because when we're physical, with the way that this world conditions us, we're barely able to see from one person's perspective, let alone 50 different people's perspective. And we're not able to go, well, actually we are able to go deeper. We could potentially go deeper, but into just one person's perspective, but we're not encouraged to. We're not really even given the time to. We have to make the time to. If it's something you really want to do, you have to make the time to do it. And that can be a tough process. And we don't even necessarily tell ourselves the truth about the effect that we have on ourselves and the way that we condemn ourselves and the true motives behind some of the things that we've done, as well as some of the things that we haven't done. I think that the afterlife review is a way for human beings to get to see from the perspectives that they couldn't see from when they were alive. Because it's one thing, and I'm sure that there will be plenty of people who disagree about this, and that's fine. I can't speak to what other people believe. I can't speak to other people's understanding, but I can only talk on my own experience and my own understanding, because that's what this video is about. That's why I'm doing the tag. I think that even if everybody died and was immediately judged by God, as heretical as some people might find this, I don't think that would really do much good. Because what's the point in a judgment that you can't understand? What are you going to learn from a judgment that you can't understand? What are you going to learn from a decision that was made, good, bad, or indifferent, if you don't understand why the decision was made, if you don't understand at least some of the contributing factors. So from that perspective, one would have to have a life review. A life review would be mandatory. You would have to have something similar to that. And I think that perhaps if we took that into consideration, if we took the multifaceted nature of human beings into consideration, perhaps we would be slower to judge each other, and perhaps we'd also be slower to judge ourselves and be a little less afraid to take a good long look in the mirror and ask ourselves why we do or don't do the things that we do or don't do. And maybe we would hate each other and first and foremost ourselves a little less. So going more into the concept of the afterlife, I personally believe that there are an awful lot of things that could happen to you when you die. I was brought up with the idea that you either go to heaven or you go to hell. That's it. Anything in between is either fictitious or dumb luck. And but these days, as I got older and as I continued on my journey, I began to see where other concepts could come into play and be open to other ideas, because I think that what your afterlife is going to be based in part on, well, largely on what was going on during your physical life, and therefore that afterlife is going to be tailored to each individual. Which, had I been told that in Christianity, if that was something that Christianity had embraced or re-embraced, possibly, I think that perhaps we would have a better understanding of and less of a fear of things like death or even things like the paranormal. Because if you just believe in heaven or hell, nothing in between, then how do you explain everything in between, everything that is actually quite obviously in between? At least it's obvious to me. I think also that when your afterlife is being determined, it will also be based on what your overall journey is about. How much wisdom the person gained, whether or not they obtained accurate spiritual info, and if so, how much of it. Also, what lies they may have believed, what propaganda they were fed. You know, all different things can come into it. And I'm not somebody who, unlike a lot of people who went into New Age and accepted everything in New Age, or accepted the majority of it, because I was involved in New Age for a while, I never bought in to the idea of, oh, when you leave your body, you're just pure light. Well, I can see why they say that. I can see why they say that, because you're not using this. So yeah, that, in a sense, that makes sense, but that's not, that wasn't the way that people were interpreting that. They were saying it as a way of saying, oh, when you die, you're perfect, and you don't have any flaws, and you never lie, and you don't do this and you don't do that, and you're just a higher consciousness, you're an ascended being naturally, regardless of how much you actually knew during your life, and regardless of what kinds of things you got involved in your life in some cases, and regardless of whether or not you ever even got the chance or were told about things such as shadow work, which is something that the New Age and Neo-Pagan community like to talk about a lot. But there are an awful lot of people who either have never heard of it or don't believe in it. That doesn't necessarily mean that the person isn't spiritual. They may be part of a tradition that those are not terms that they readily recognize. That doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have something similar, but they might not recognize that you're actually talking about the same thing. So I personally don't believe that when you die, somehow death endows you with new virtues. Let's put it like that. I don't believe in that. That doesn't mean that I think if you don't follow a particular tradition and you don't get every single little thing right the first time that you're damned. No. No. Because going back to what I said again, man looks at the interior, God looks on the interior. Big difference. Question 9. Describe your spiritual journey and where you are currently. Again, content for a whole separate video. So, brief rundown. Raised non-denominational. Had contact with New Age. Came away from in other people's terms. I'm using other people's terminology, not necessarily the terminology that I would use, in order to hopefully make it a little clearer and more accessible to the people watching the video. Raised non-denominational. My mind was opened to the idea, or the reality actually, of there being a lot missing from Christianity, things that were deliberately left out. Started seeking that, looked into multiple other religions, multiple other traditions, multiple other cultures even. Had experiences in the New Age, moved into Wicca, primarily Wicca, and came across Allura, began working with her, and I still do. Now, I've taken courses with her, I practice open spirituality. So my practice, partly due to it being open spirituality, but largely due to what I have learned on my own, as well as a huge amount of stuff that I've learned from Allura. My own, quote, spiritual practice, unquote. I hate doing this, but so that you know what I'm putting it in quotation marks. My own spiritual practice has facets, specifics, and details that others probably don't, due to the fact that I work with Allura, as well as due to other things that I've learned previously on my own. And question 10, why believe? Why do you hold on to your spiritual beliefs? What attracts you to them? Well, I worked mighty hard to get where I am, and I ain't losing that. That's one reason. I'm not about to stop now. Why believe? Why hold on to beliefs? Well, look at the state of people who don't. I learn by example. I learn by observation. Look at the state of the world. I learn by example. I learn by observation. I do suspect, quote, suspect, that in terms of humanity in general, we were far better off when we were predominantly pagan. In many ways, I think we were far better off, because at least we didn't think that there weren't consequences for our actions and our the way that we conducted ourselves. We didn't go around claiming that we were top dog in the universe, that everything revolved around us. We didn't spend so much time trying to bend the world and the forces in the world to our convoluted will. That doesn't necessarily mean that we got everything right. No, far from it. Human and animal sacrifice is not the done thing. That's there were an awful lot of things that we shouldn't have been doing. There were an awful lot of things that we shouldn't have been doing. There's a whole lot of stuff that we shouldn't be doing now. But I think that as a species, we were probably less arrogant, at least a little bit less arrogant. And we had a genuine belief in somebody we had to answer to sooner or later. We had a genuine belief that there were forces who we couldn't see, but who could see us. We had a genuine belief that, going back to the verse of God looking on the heart, there was a genuine belief. That was a genuine belief. It wasn't just something that somebody said because it sounded poetic, which is what some people think, I think. That's certainly the way that they act. That doesn't mean that I'm hating on anybody who's part of a certain tradition or has certain doubts or certain beliefs, whatever. I'm just saying that this is a conclusion that I've come to. We were better off when people accepted that they were not top dog. Because even in those societies, people believed that the laws ultimately came down from the gods or from whichever higher powers they believed gave them laws. And it was the job of the humans to make sure that they followed the rules, because the rules helped to ensure harmony. At least that was the idea. That was the intention behind it. So even people who wanted to break them at least did you the common courtesy of not doing it out in the open street. Nowadays, oh, what the heck? Everything goes. It's like the song. Now heaven knows anything goes. Hell knows too. as far as what attracts me to my beliefs, the freedom that they give. There is a sense of freedom that I have gotten from open spirituality that I didn't get from Christianity. I didn't get from researching any of the other traditions that I saw. I did get something similar, but I didn't get anything like what I have now. Being allowed to look into pretty much anything I wanted, anything that I want, believe in pretty much anything I want, or rather, I think specifically, no, not believe in anything I want. No, that's the wrong way to put it. The freedom of being able to believe in what society conditions you not to believe in. Accepting beliefs that society, modern society at least, tells you is stupid. This is also the same society that claims that it is the be-all, end-all of the universe and consistently shows its wisdom in waging bigger and bigger wars and more toxic and toxic wars than practically anything our ancestors saw. Yeah, that's a wise society. Yeah. Have fun with that. I'm not gonna listen to their advice about what I should and shouldn't believe in. Yeah, if I can't trust them with those things, I'm not gonna trust them with my own path, which is permanent, which is my responsibility, and I'm the one who's going to be dealing with the consequences. I'm not going to trust them with that. I'm not going to take their advice on that. I have to be crazy, frankly. Also, the freedom of being allowed to hope when the world tells you that that's stupid. Having hope when the world tells you it's stupid too, because they do tell you it's stupid too. Daring to reach for something that the world doesn't want you to. So I can pretty much make my path, if not what it always should have been, at least the best that it should be now, in light of what I've gone through, and get a whole lot more happiness out of it. I can make it pretty much what I want, as long as it is within the boundaries of what is best for me and what's meant for me this time around, which is another topic. So my beliefs are mine, regardless of what anybody else thinks about them. I'm not subject to a human governing body that has oversight over which practices I engage in and which ones I don't. Question 11, and this is the last question. Describe your family background and the community or communities you grew up in. What is one of the best qualities, values, or lessons you want to pass on from your upbringing? What is something about yourself that made you feel like an outsider in the family or community in which you were raised? That's a multi-part question too. And I'm going to skim this way down, because this would be a much longer story, and most of it I don't really want to tell here. I actually wrote a blog post / short story. Well, no, I guess it would be considered a blog post on my author's site, the Whiteraven net, about basically the same thing. It was an autobiographical post explaining a little bit about myself, my background, my spiritual journey. It's extremely abbreviated. At some point, I might actually do a reading of that on this channel and post it. Sort of like what I'm doing with The Tale of Two Cities with the audiobooks. But without going into too many details, grew up with my parents primarily. My parents were not the only influence, but they were definitely the primary influence. But I relied primarily on my mother. She was the driving spiritual force. She was also the driving educational force. She was the one who actually made choices about my education in a much more proactive, much more informed way. So I was homeschooled for the entirety of my life, except for an extremely brief period, like only a day or so, when I experienced public school. Absolutely hated it. And I would, if I had to do it over again, I would still do the same thing. I would still be homeschooled for the entirety of my life, because that had a huge impact on making me far more of an independent thinker. And of course, at the time, I did not recognize that was what it was doing. But in retrospect, with the interactions I had with the other children, 99% of the other children who I knew were not homeschooled. They either went to a Christian school or public school. In fact, I would say probably all but a couple of them went to public school. I asked a whole lot more questions. I tended to break things down an awful lot more. I read a lot. I was a lot more literate than they were. I had a wider range of interests. There were still things that we could talk about. There were still things that we could share. There were still things that we had in common. But I had a tendency to be the one who was more creative, more intuitive. I was better suited to making the best of certain types of situations where they might be bored. I said, "No, let's do this. Let's go get a cardboard box and turn it into something." Things that they were not necessarily encouraged to do. I think in terms of her question, what kinds of things would you want to pass on from your upbringing? I think she's primarily thinking of, well, if you had children or if you have children, which I don't, what would you pass on? I would probably homeschool them too. I can pretty much say 100% guarantee I would. I wouldn't necessarily do it in exactly the same way that I was homeschooled. I think I would use probably at least some of the same curriculum, but I would add a lot more, and I think it would be more, I would turn it into a bit more of an adventure, because not that my mother didn't, it's just that I'm a little bit different, and I would run the risk of going off onto all kinds of different tangents. And also, since now I practice open spirituality, I would incorporate that in a different way. I would incorporate spiritual teachings in a different way, so that they could be exposed to a broader range of topics than I was. I would pass on, definitely, again with the homeschooling, the importance of going deeper in every possible way, questioning everything, keeping love for God at the center of all things, because that was what really served me well. It doesn't really matter what name you give to God, so long as you have an interest in and a devotion for him. I think that's the key. I don't think he particularly cares what you call him. That's my personal opinion. My personal conclusion that I have come to, based on a lot of things that I've seen, heard, read, experienced. I don't think that he particularly cares what name you give him. Because they're all human words. They're all human words. The point is, do you actually know who you're talking about? Do you actually know who you're addressing? Regardless of the name that you use in whatever language you speak, do you know who you're addressing? I think that's really what matters. So it wouldn't really matter to me if I had a child. It wouldn't matter what he or she decided to call God. I wouldn't particularly care. I wouldn't particularly care one way or the other. But I would definitely pass on the importance of that concept, because I think I would be doing my child a disservice if I didn't. And also because I saw quite a few examples of people who did not hold to that idea of God and did not make it more important in their life, or who just disregarded the concept of God entirely. And I saw them go through some things that I thought, that's really kind of unnecessary. And I saw them doing all kinds of mental gymnastics that I thought, that's kind of do you really want to spend your energy on that? Really? Aren't there other things that you could spend your energy on? Really? I would also pass on the concept that family is what you make of it. And that is not to say that I would tell them, just disregard who you're actually related to. Just disregard where you come from, because as somebody who has a fondness for her ancestors and who likes to chit-chat with the ancestors, I think I would be doing my child a disservice, because you come from somewhere and you come from somewhere for a reason. But I would when I say that I would impress that family is what you make of it, that includes your biological family, your connections, what you do with them, how you nurture them, and that there are times when if it's not going both ways, if you don't have both parties putting in roughly the same amount of effort, then that's going to change the situation, because all people have to contribute to the family, regardless of whether they're biologically related or not. Everybody has to contribute in some way in order to keep that system, in order to keep that ecosystem balanced. In order for it to work, you have to work together, and you have to put effort into it in some way, shape, or form. And I would also teach them to do the same with really all of their relationships, regardless of who it was. Friendships, romantic interests. The importance of everybody understanding that you're all in this together, and it doesn't all have to fall on one person's shoulders, because I have bad experiences with that happening. So that is the end of this tag video. I hope it was interesting. I hope it was at least Well, it was definitely informative. It was definitely informative. You know a fair bit more about me now than you did before you watched it. And like I said, I will put the link to the blog post on holytension.com in the description box below this video. This is not necessarily an endorsement of that blog. I just thought that the lady who runs it or ran it did a very good job with these questions, and they were really the only set of questions, or at least the very best set of questions that I could find anywhere on the internet that really suited me and felt like something that was more akin to the first video I should do on this type of topic. So who knows, at some point I might do a similar video that is not necessarily tag video, but maybe goes a little deeper into some of the topics, if anybody's interested in that. I will also be doing more of the audiobooks and more of the spoken word. I have, at the moment, 2 other items that I'm going to be recording. I'm going to start doing the next chapter for Tale of Two Cities. All of the chapters from here on out are roughly the same length as the one that you just saw, the one that I just uploaded. So those are going to take a bit longer for me to record, but I'm going to start recording the new chapter now, and hopefully have that up sometime next month, because we're now getting close to the middle of July. So I don't think I'm going to be able to do it by the end of the month or the beginning of next month, but sometime next month I will keep you updated in the community tab, through the community tab. And I'll also be posting reels and all that stuff on Instagram. So I hope everybody's having a good day. I hope that this video made some kind of sense. Feel free to have a conversation down below in the comments section. Just keep it polite. Keep it polite. You don't have to agree. You can agree to disagree. Believe me, I do it all the time. It is possible. Shocking, I know. In light of, if you watch some of the stuff going on in the world, it actually is possible to agree to disagree. If you doubt that, please don't. Take it from me. It happens. It does happen all the time. It's just that right now we've got an awful lot of noise, and they don't want you to agree to disagree. They don't want you to listen to what somebody else says. So let's try to keep it nice, keep it kind, keep it clean. Keep it clean. I don't go in for that. Please don't bring that to my channel. And I will see you next time. Toodaloo.